Ethan Brooks never expected that a single knock on his door would shatter the careful walls he'd built around his life. At 29, he'd mastered the art of being enough. Enough father, enough provider, enough stability for his 6-year-old daughter Mia. He'd sworn off complications, sworn off risks, sworn off anything that could threaten the fragile peace they'd found after her mother left. But when his neighbor Claire Holloway stood trembling on his porch that October night, rain-soaked and desperate, asking him for something that would change everything, Ethan discovered that some choices don't wait for you to be ready. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're already hooked, hit that like button and stay with me until the end. Trust me, you won't want to miss where this goes. The October rain came sideways in Eugene, Oregon, the kind that found every gap in your jacket and reminded you that winter was closer than you thought. Ethan Brooks stood at his kitchen window, watching water sheet down the glass, distorting the streetlights into smeared halos of amber. Behind him, the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling and the soft hum of the refrigerator. It was 8:30 on a Thursday night, which meant Mia was already asleep upstairs, her room glowing with the nightlight shaped like a crescent moon. Ethan had just finished cleaning up from dinner, mac and cheese again, because Thursdays were always mac and cheese, just like Tuesdays were always tacos, and Sundays were always pancakes. Routine wasn't exciting, but it was safe. It was predictable. It was the scaffolding that kept their world from collapsing. Ethan was 29 years old, but most days he felt older. Single parenthood had a way of aging you in ways that had nothing to do with gray hair or wrinkles. It was the weight of being everything: mother and father, chef and chauffeur, teacher and protector. It was the constant low-level anxiety that something might go wrong, that he might miss something crucial, that one mistake could undo all the careful work he'd done to give Mia a stable life. He'd been doing this alone for 3 years now, ever since Mia's mother, Jessica, had decided that motherhood wasn't what she'd signed up for. Ethan still remembered the morning she'd left, Mia not even 4 years old, Jessica's suitcase already packed, her eyes distant and cold. "I can't do this anymore," she'd said, her voice flat, emotionless. "I'm not cut out for this life. I need more than diapers and bedtime stories and small-town nothing." Ethan had begged her to stay, promised they could work it out, promised anything if she'd just give them another chance. But Jessica had already checked out emotionally months before she physically walked out the door. She'd signed over full custody without a fight, sent birthday cards for the first year, then even those had stopped coming. Mia asked about her mother sometimes, in that heartbreaking way children do when they're trying to understand why they weren't enough to make someone stay. Ethan never badmouthed Jessica, never poisoned Mia against her, but he also couldn't explain something he didn't understand himself. How do you tell a little girl that some people just aren't capable of the kind of love she deserves? So Ethan had built a new life from the rubble. He'd taken a job as an appliance repair technician with a local company, work that paid decently and kept him close to home. He'd learned to braid hair from YouTube videos, mastered the art of negotiating vegetable consumption, and became an expert at voicing all the characters in Mia's favorite bedtime stories with distinct personalities that made her giggle. Their house was small, a one-story ranch on Maple Street with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that had seen better decades. But it was theirs. The mortgage was manageable, the neighborhood was safe, and Mia had a backyard with a swing set Ethan had assembled himself, cursing through the incomprehensible instructions until nearly midnight. Ethan didn't date. He didn't go to bars or swipe through apps or entertain the occasional hint of interest from customers who watched him fix their refrigerators with capable hands. Romance felt like a luxury he couldn't afford, a complication that had already blown up in his face once. Mia needed consistency, not a revolving door of potential stepmothers who might or might not stick around. Besides, Ethan told himself he was fine alone. He had Mia. He had work. He had his sister Naomi, who lived 2 hours away in Portland but called every Sunday and visited whenever she could. He had his small circle of stability, and that was enough. Or at least, it had been enough until Claire Holloway moved in across the street 2 years ago. Ethan noticed her immediately, though not in the way he might have noticed a woman before Mia. There was something about Claire that caught his attention in a quieter way. The careful precision with which she planted roses along her front walk, the way she always waved at neighbors but never quite met anyone's eyes. The polite distance she maintained even as she became a fixture at block parties and community events. Claire was 33, though she had one of those faces that could have been anywhere from late 20s to early 40s depending on the light. She was pretty in an understated way. Shoulder-length brown hair usually pulled back in a ponytail, minimal makeup, clothes that favored comfort over fashion. She worked from home doing something with graphic design or marketing. Ethan wasn't entirely sure. He'd see her sometimes through her front window, hunched over a laptop, completely absorbed. What struck Ethan most about Claire wasn't what she did, but what she didn't do. She didn't have visitors. She didn't blast music or throw parties. Her house was always immaculate, her lawn always manicured, everything controlled and perfect in a way that felt less like pride and more like armor. They'd had their first real conversation about 6 months after she moved in, when Claire had knocked on his door on a Saturday morning, apologetic and embarrassed. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she'd said, "but I think my garbage disposal is dying and I have no idea what I'm doing. The landlord said I could call a plumber, but my neighbor mentioned you fix appliances for a living, and I thought maybe—" Ethan had grabbed his toolbox and followed her across the street, Mia trailing behind because she went everywhere with him on weekends. The problem had been simple: a jammed flywheel and some worn-out gaskets. 20 minutes and Ethan had it running smoothly again. Claire had insisted on paying him, but Ethan had refused. "We're neighbors," he'd said. "Neighbors help each other out." She'd thanked him with homemade lemon bars that were so good, Mia had declared Claire the best baker in the world. After that, it became a pattern. Claire would have some minor household crisis: a squeaky door hinge, a flickering light fixture, a toilet that ran constantly, and Ethan would come over with his tools and fix it. Claire would thank him with baked goods or coffee, or once, memorably, a lasagna that had been better than anything Ethan had managed to cook in years. It was friendly, neighborly, completely innocent. But Ethan noticed things that maybe he shouldn't have noticed, things that tugged at something protective in his chest. He noticed that Claire's smiles never quite reached her eyes. He noticed that her laughter sounded practiced, like she'd learned to fake joy so convincingly that most people couldn't tell the difference. He noticed the way she looked at Mia sometimes, with a hunger and a sadness so profound it was almost physical. Once, when Ethan was replacing a washer in Claire's kitchen sink, Mia had wandered into the living room and started examining the photos on Claire's mantle. There weren't many. Claire's house was oddly sparse for someone who'd lived there 2 years, but there was one frame turned face down. "Why is this picture sleeping?" Mia had asked in that direct way children have, reaching for it. Ethan had been about to tell Mia not to touch other people's things when Claire had appeared, moving faster than Ethan had ever seen her move, gently intercepting Mia's hand. "That one's just for me, sweetheart," Claire had said, her voice tight, and Ethan had seen her hands tremble as she'd turned the frame face down again. Later, when Mia was distracted with a coloring book Claire had given her, Ethan had caught Claire staring at that frame with an expression of such raw pain that he'd had to look away, feeling like he'd intruded on something too private to witness. He'd wanted to ask, wanted to understand what grief Claire was carrying that made her eyes go hollow sometimes in the middle of perfectly normal conversations. But Ethan had his own wounds he didn't talk about, his own failures he kept locked away, so he understood the need for privacy. He understood that some stories were too heavy to share with people you only knew through casual pleasantries and borrowed sugar. So the months had passed. Ethan fixed things for Claire. Claire baked things for Ethan. They waved at each other from their respective driveways. They made small talk about the weather and the neighborhood. They existed in each other's orbits in a way that was comfortable and safe and completely surface level. Until tonight. The knock on Ethan's door came at 8:45, just as he was considering heading upstairs to shower and fall into bed with the mystery novel he'd been working through for 3 weeks. It wasn't late, exactly, but it was late enough that unexpected visitors were unusual. Ethan opened the door expecting maybe a delivery he'd forgotten about, or a neighbor with some community newsletter. What he found instead was Claire Holloway, and she looked like she was barely holding herself together. Rain had soaked through her coat, plastering her hair to her skull. Her face was pale, almost bloodless, and her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen like she'd been crying for hours. She clutched a knitted blanket to her chest, blue and yellow, clearly handmade, holding it like a child holds a security object. "Claire?" Ethan's stomach dropped. His first thought was that something terrible had happened. A death, an accident, something that would explain why she looked like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm sorry," Claire whispered, her voice cracking. "I shouldn't be here. I didn't know where else to go. I can't be alone in that house tonight. I can't." Ethan stepped back immediately, pulling the door wider. "Come in, please, come in." Claire hesitated for just a moment, then stepped across the threshold, dripping rainwater onto Ethan's entryway floor. She stood there looking lost, like she'd just realized she had no idea what to do next. "Let me get you a towel," Ethan said, keeping his voice low and calm, even though his heart was hammering. He grabbed a clean towel from the bathroom and handed it to her, then guided her gently toward the living room. "Sit down. I'll make tea, or coffee, or something stronger if you need it." "Tea is fine," Claire said, sinking onto the couch like her legs had given out. She didn't let go of the blanket. Ethan moved into the kitchen, putting the kettle on and pulling out mugs while his mind raced through possibilities. Claire had always been private, always been controlled. Seeing her like this, vulnerable and barely holding together, was jarring in a way that made him realize how little he actually knew about his neighbor. When the tea was ready, Ethan brought it to the living room and sat in the chair across from Claire, giving her space. She wrapped her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth, staring into the steam. "I'm sorry," she said again. "This is so inappropriate. We barely know each other and I just showed up at your door like some kind of—" "Claire." Ethan's voice was firm but gentle. "We've been neighbors for 2 years. You fed me more times than I can count. You gave Mia that stuffed rabbit she sleeps with every night. We might not share our life stories, but we're not strangers. Whatever's going on, you don't have to apologize for needing help." Claire looked up at him then, and Ethan saw something crack in her carefully maintained composure. Her eyes filled with tears that spilled over, running down her cheeks. "I lost them," she whispered. "My husband, my daughter, 5 years ago." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd known Claire was carrying grief, had sensed it in 100 small ways, but this was different. This was the kind of loss that didn't heal, that you just learned to carry. "There was an accident," Claire continued, her voice hollow now, like she was reciting facts she'd repeated so many times they'd lost all meaning. "Drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time. Michael was killed instantly. Emma, our daughter, she was 4, she held on for 2 days in the hospital, but her injuries were too severe." "Claire, I'm so sorry." The words felt pathetically inadequate, but Ethan didn't know what else to say. What could you say to someone who'd lost everything? "I did therapy, I did grief counseling, I did all the things you're supposed to do to survive something like that." Claire's hands were shaking now, tea sloshing in her mug. "And I did survive. I got up every morning, I went back to work. I moved to a new city because I couldn't stand being in our house anymore. Couldn't stand walking past Emma's empty bedroom. I built this new life where I could pretend to be okay." "But you're not okay," Ethan said softly. "I'm drowning," Claire said, and the desperation in her voice made Ethan's chest tight. "I thought I could handle it. I thought I could just keep going, keep being functional, keep pretending that this half-life was enough. But lately it's been getting worse. The silence in my house, it's so loud I can't think. I walk into my living room and I can still see her, Emma, playing with her toys, laughing at cartoons. I make dinner and I have to remind myself not to set 3 places at the table." She set down the tea with shaking hands and finally looked directly at Ethan, her eyes desperate and pleading. "I miss being a mom," she whispered. "I miss it so much it feels like it's killing me. I miss goodnight kisses and scraped knees and bedtime stories. I miss having someone need me, having a reason to get up in the morning beyond just existing. And I know this is insane. I know I sound crazy, but I've been thinking about it for months and I can't stop thinking about it, and I just—" Claire took a shuddering breath, and Ethan knew with absolute certainty that whatever she was about to say would change everything. "I want to have another baby," Claire said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I want to be a mother again. I need to be a mother again. But I don't have a partner, and I'm 33, and I know time is running out, and I've thought about sperm donors and adoption and every possible option, but they all feel so clinical and cold and wrong." She was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe her tears. I need someone I trust, she said. Someone good. Someone who's already proven they know how to be a parent. Someone who understands what it means to show up for a child every single day. The living room felt too small suddenly, the air too thin. Ethan's mouth went dry as he realized where this was going. I've watched you with Mia, Claire continued, her voice breaking. I've seen how patient you are, how present, how much you love her. You're exactly the kind of person I'd want my child to have in their DNA. And I know this is insane. I know I'm asking for something that people don't just ask for, but I don't have anyone else. I don't have family. I don't have close friends. I have you, and you've been kind to me, and I thought maybe you'd consider Claire. Ethan's voice came out strangled. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. I'm not asking you to marry me, Claire said quickly, desperately. I'm not asking you to be my boyfriend or my partner or anything like that. I know you have Mia. I know your life is complicated. I wouldn't expect anything from you that you didn't want to give. If you wanted to be involved, that would be wonderful. If you didn't, I would understand completely. I could do this alone. I just need this one thing. Please! Ethan couldn't breathe. His mind was spinning, thoughts colliding and fragmenting. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. People didn't just show up at your door and ask you to father their child like they were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. But even as his rational mind recoiled, another part of him understood with painful clarity why Claire had come to him. Not because they were close friends, not because of some secret attraction, but because she was desperate and alone and he'd shown her a sliver of kindness in a world that had taken everything from her. I can't, Ethan heard himself say, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. Claire, I can't. Mia, I have to think about Mia. Everything I do, every choice I make, it has to be about what's best for her. And this, bringing another child into the world, even if I wasn't involved in raising them, it would change things. It would complicate everything. I can't risk her stability. I can't risk the life we've built. Claire's face crumpled. She stood abruptly, still clutching that blue and yellow blanket. Emma's blanket, Ethan realized with a sharp twist of pain. I understand, Claire whispered, though her voice said she didn't understand at all, that she'd just taken the last desperate shot she had and missed. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have asked. I should go. Claire, wait. But she was already moving toward the door, and Ethan didn't know how to stop her, didn't know what to say that wouldn't make this worse. She paused at the threshold, not turning back. Thank you for the tea, she said, her voice completely empty now. And I'm sorry for putting you in this position. I won't bother you again. Then she was gone, disappearing into the rain, and Ethan was left standing in his living room staring at 2 mugs of untouched tea and trying to process what had just happened. His hands were trembling. His legs felt weak. He sank onto the couch Claire had just vacated and put his head in his hands. What Claire had asked for was impossible. It was crazy. It was the kind of thing that only happened in stories, not in real life between 2 people who barely knew each other. But even as Ethan told himself this, even as he tried to rationalize his refusal, he couldn't shake the image of Claire's face. The desperation, the grief, the terrible lonely hunger for something she'd lost and would never get back. She'd lost her daughter. She'd lost her chance at motherhood. And she was so desperate to reclaim even a piece of that life that she'd humiliated herself by asking a near stranger for help. Ethan thought about Mia upstairs, sleeping peacefully in her moon-glow room. He thought about what his life would be like if she'd been taken from him, if some drunk driver had stolen his reason for existing. He thought about how he'd probably lose his mind too, how he'd probably do anything, ask anyone for a chance to be a father again. But this wasn't about empathy. This was about reality. This was about the fact that Ethan had responsibilities, that his first and only priority had to be the child who already depended on him. Except Ethan couldn't stop thinking about Claire's words. You're exactly the kind of person I'd want my child to have in their DNA. Couldn't stop thinking about how she'd looked at Mia sometimes, with that heartbreaking mix of love and loss. Couldn't stop thinking about how Claire had been so careful to say she'd do it alone, that she wouldn't expect anything from him, that she was trying to make this as easy as possible, even though what she was asking was monumentally difficult. Ethan sat in his quiet living room long after the tea went cold, staring at the rain-streaked windows and feeling like the careful, controlled life he'd built was suddenly standing on very unstable ground. He told himself he'd made the right choice. He told himself that by morning, this would feel less overwhelming, less impossible. He told himself that Claire would understand, that she'd move on, that things would go back to normal. But deep down, Ethan knew that something fundamental had shifted tonight. Claire had knocked on his door and asked him for something that couldn't be unasked. She'd shown him her broken heart and her desperate hope, and now Ethan couldn't unknow what he knew, couldn't unsee the grief in her eyes, couldn't unhear the loneliness in her voice when she said she missed being a mom. And as Ethan finally forced himself upstairs to check on Mia, his beautiful, sleeping daughter, who was the center of his entire universe, he found himself wondering a question he had no business wondering. What if Claire was right? What if he was the kind of person who could help her? What if saying no wasn't protecting Mia at all, but just protecting himself from risk, from complication, from the possibility that there might be more to life than just surviving? Ethan stood in Mia's doorway, watching her sleep, her chest rising and falling in that perfect rhythm that meant everything was okay in her world. And he made himself a promise. Tomorrow, he'd forget this ever happened. Tomorrow, he'd go back to work and routine and the safe, predictable life that kept both of them stable. Tomorrow, things would go back to normal. But even as Ethan promised himself this, even as he closed Mia's door and went to his own room and tried to sleep, he knew it was a lie. Because Claire Holloway had knocked on his door tonight and asked him for a miracle. And Ethan Brooks, careful, cautious, risk-averse Ethan Brooks, couldn't stop thinking about what it might mean to say yes. The next morning arrived with the kind of gray October light that made everything feel muted and distant. Ethan woke at 6 like always, his internal alarm clock more reliable than any phone. For exactly 3 seconds, his world was normal. The familiar weight of his blankets, the sound of rain still pattering against the windows, the knowledge that he needed to get Mia up and ready for school. Then memory crashed back in, and Ethan's stomach clenched. Claire's face in his doorway, desperate and rain-soaked, her voice breaking as she asked him for the impossible. The blue and yellow blanket clutched to her chest like a lifeline. The way she'd looked at him when he'd said no, like he'd just confirmed what she'd always suspected about herself, that she was too broken to deserve a second chance. Ethan groaned and pressed his palms against his eyes. He hadn't slept well. Every time he'd started to drift off, his mind would spin back to that conversation, examining it from every angle, replaying Claire's words until they lost all meaning and became just sounds. I miss being a mom. I miss it so much it feels like it's killing me. Downstairs, Ethan went through the morning routine on autopilot. Coffee brewing, lunch packed, turkey sandwich, apple slices, the granola bar Mia would try to trade with her friend Sophie. He climbed the stairs and gently woke his daughter, smiling at the way she blinked slowly at him, her dark hair a tangled mess. "Morning, bug," he said softly. "School day." Mia groaned dramatically and pulled her blanket over her head. 5 more minutes. "You said that yesterday and we were almost late. Come on, let's go." This was familiar. This was safe. This was the life Ethan understood, the gentle negotiation of getting a 6-year-old dressed and fed and out the door with everything she needed. He focused on it completely, letting the routine crowd out everything else. But when he dropped Mia off at Eugene Elementary and watched her skip toward her classroom, her little mermaid backpack bouncing, Ethan caught himself looking across the street at Claire's house. The lights were off. Her car was in the driveway. The roses she tended so carefully looked bedraggled from the rain. Ethan forced himself to look away and drove to work. Patterson's Appliance Repair occupied a small storefront on the edge of downtown, wedged between a second-hand bookstore and a Vietnamese restaurant. Ethan had worked there for 4 years, ever since he'd needed steady income and health insurance after Jessica left. The owner, Tom Patterson, was a gruff man in his 60s who'd given Ethan a chance when most places wanted more experience, and Ethan had repaid that trust by becoming his most reliable technician. "Brooks," Tom called from the back office when Ethan walked in. "Got 3 service calls for you today. Refrigerator in Thurston, washing machine on Amazon Parkway, and some lady on Willamette who says her oven is making a demonic humming sound." Ethan grabbed the work orders and his toolkit. Normally, he liked service calls. There was something satisfying about diagnosing a problem and fixing it, about taking something broken and making it work again. Clean problems with clean solutions, not like the mess Claire had dropped in his lap last night. The refrigerator repair was straightforward, a failed compressor relay that Ethan replaced in 20 minutes. The washing machine took longer, a broken belt that required him to disassemble half the machine to reach. By the time he got to the oven call, it was past noon and Ethan still hadn't eaten lunch. Mrs. Henderson, the oven owner, was a chatty woman in her 70s who insisted on making him tea while he worked. She talked about her grandchildren, about the neighbor's cat that kept getting into her yard, about the rising cost of groceries. Ethan made appropriate sounds and nodded in the right places, but his mind was elsewhere. "You seem distracted today, dear," Mrs. Henderson observed, watching him test the heating element. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," Ethan lied. "Didn't sleep well." "Woman troubles?" she asked with the bluntness of someone who'd lived long enough not to bother with subtlety. Ethan nearly dropped his multimeter. "What? No, nothing like that." Mrs. Henderson sounded thoroughly unconvinced. "Well, whatever it is, don't let it fester. That's the problem with young people today. You all think you have to figure everything out alone. Sometimes you need to talk to someone, get perspective." The oven's problem turned out to be a loose wire in the thermostat. Ethan tightened the connection, tested it twice, and charged Mrs. Henderson the standard service fee plus parts. As he packed up his tools, she pressed a container of cookies into his hands. "For your daughter," she said, "and think about what I said. Talk to someone." Driving back to the shop, Ethan found himself thinking about his sister. Naomi was 3 years older, married to a high school teacher named David, and possessed the kind of no-nonsense wisdom that came from being the one who'd held their family together when their parents divorced messily during her teenage years. She'd practically raised Ethan, and even now, even with 2 hours of distance between them, she was the first person he called when life got complicated. "But how did you even begin to explain this?" "Hey, Naomi, my neighbor asked me to father her baby because she's still grieving her dead daughter, and I said no, but now I can't stop thinking about it." That sounded insane even in his head. Ethan made it through the rest of his workday, picked up Mia from after-school care, and drove home with her chattering about her day, about the frog they'd seen in the playground, about how Sophie had shared her fruit snacks, about the art project they were doing with pasta shapes. He should have been listening more closely, should have been engaged and present. But as they turned onto Maple Street and their house came into view, Ethan's eyes went automatically to Claire's place across the street. The lights were on now. He could see movement through the front window, just a shadow passing by the curtains. "Daddy?" Mia's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are we going to see Miss Claire soon? I want to show her my drawing." Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Maybe not for a little while, Bug. Miss Claire might be busy." "But she's never too busy," Mia protested. "She said I could visit whenever I want." That had been true. Claire had always welcomed Mia with genuine warmth, had kept a box of crayons and coloring books specifically for her visits, had listened to Mia's rambling stories with patience and attention. And Mia, who'd grown up without a mother and with few women in her immediate orbit, had latched onto Claire in a way that made Ethan's chest ache sometimes. What would Mia think if she knew what Claire had asked? Would she understand that it wasn't about her, that Ethan's refusal had nothing to do with whether Claire was good or kind or worthy? Inside their house, Ethan started on dinner while Mia did her homework at the kitchen table. Spaghetti tonight. Friday was always spaghetti. He put water on to boil and opened a jar of sauce, moving through the familiar motions while his mind spun in circles. He kept coming back to the same thoughts. Claire's grief, her loneliness, the desperate edge in her voice when she'd said she couldn't keep living this half-life, the fact that she'd trusted him enough to ask, even knowing he might say no. And underneath all of it, a question he didn't want to examine too closely. What if she was right about him? Ethan had never thought of himself as particularly special. He was just a guy doing his best, trying not to screw up too badly, hoping that love and consistency would be enough to make up for all the ways he fell short. But Claire saw something in him worth preserving in her child's DNA. She thought he was the kind of person whose qualities deserved to be passed on. When had anyone ever believed that about him? Jessica certainly hadn't. His own father had barely stuck around long enough to teach Ethan how to shave. But Claire, grief-stricken, isolated Claire, looked at him and saw someone worth trusting with her most desperate hope. "Daddy, the water's boiling over," Mia announced calmly. Ethan swore under his breath and grabbed the pot, sloshing hot water onto the stove. He turned down the heat and added the pasta, frustrated with himself for being so distracted. They ate dinner. He helped Mia with her bath. He read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through, something about a girl who discovers she's secretly a princess, which Mia found endlessly fascinating. He tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and told her he loved her more than all the stars in the sky. "Love you more than all the fish in the ocean," Mia responded, their usual call and response. Ethan turned on her nightlight and closed her door most of the way, leaving it open just enough that she wouldn't feel alone in the dark. Then he went downstairs, poured himself a glass of whiskey he rarely touched, and sat on the couch staring at nothing. His phone sat on the coffee table, silent and accusatory. He should call Naomi, should talk this through with someone who knew him well enough to tell him whether he was overthinking or underthinking or just completely losing his mind. Ethan picked up the phone. "Put it down." Picked it up again. Finally, at nearly 10 o'clock, he dialed his sister's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but concerned. "Ethan? Everything okay? It's late for you." "Yeah, sorry, I know it's late. Is this a bad time?" "David's already asleep and I was just reading. What's going on? You sound weird." Ethan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "I need to talk to you about something, and you're going to think I've lost my mind." "Okay, now you're worrying me. Is Mia all right?" "Mia's fine. This isn't about her." "Well, it is, but..." Ethan rubbed his face with his free hand. "Just let me tell you what happened, and then you can tell me I'm crazy." He laid it all out. Claire's history that he'd never known, the knock on his door, the blue and yellow blanket, her desperate request and his immediate refusal, the way he couldn't stop thinking about it even though he knew he'd made the right choice. Naomi listened without interrupting, which was one of her strengths, the ability to just sit with information before responding. When Ethan finally ran out of words, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Wow," Naomi said finally. That's a lot. I told you it was crazy." "It's not crazy. It's complicated. There's a difference." He heard her shifting, probably sitting up in bed. "How are you feeling about it?" "I don't know. Confused? Guilty? Like I did the right thing, but it doesn't feel right?" "Why did you say no?" Naomi asked. "And I'm not judging. I'm just asking. What was your first thought?" Ethan didn't have to think about it. "Mia, that it would complicate her life, that I can't risk doing anything that might destabilize what we've built." "Okay, that's a valid concern, but Ethan..." Naomi paused, choosing her words carefully. "Is that really about Mia, or is it about you being afraid?" The question hit harder than Ethan expected. "What's that supposed to mean? You've built this incredibly structured life, everything on a schedule, everything controlled, everything predictable, and that's been good. It's given Mia stability after Jessica left. But sometimes I wonder if you use Mia as an excuse not to take any risks for yourself." "That's not fair," Ethan said, defensive. "Everything I do is for her." "I know that. I do. But Ethan, you haven't been on a date in 3 years. You don't have hobbies. You don't see friends. You go to work and you come home and you take care of Mia, and that's your entire existence. And yes, that makes you an amazing father, but it also means you've made yourself so small." Ethan's throat felt tight. "I can't afford to be selfish. I'm all she has." Being a whole person isn't selfish. And honestly, kids need to see their parents living full lives. They need to see that it's okay to want things, to take chances, to be more than just a caretaker. Naomi's voice softened. "I'm not saying you should say yes to Claire, but I am saying you should examine why your first instinct was to shut it down completely. Is it really about protecting Mia, or is it about protecting yourself from the possibility of getting hurt again?" Ethan closed his eyes. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist that Naomi was wrong, that this had nothing to do with his own fear. But there was truth in what she was saying, uncomfortable, unwelcome truth. I barely know Claire, he said finally. We've had maybe a dozen real conversations. How am I supposed to make a decision like this with someone I barely know? That's a fair point, but it sounds like maybe you should get to know her better before you completely write this off. Not because you've committed to anything, but because you're clearly not at peace with how you left things. You think I should help her? Ethan couldn't keep the disbelief out of his voice. I think you should talk to her again. Really talk to her. Ask the questions you need answered. Think about what this would actually look like, not just worst-case scenarios, and then make a decision based on information instead of fear. Naomi paused. Look, this is a huge thing she's asking. Nobody would blame you for saying no. But you called me at 10 o'clock on a Friday night because you can't stop thinking about it, which tells me you're not done processing this yet. They talked for another 20 minutes, Naomi asking questions that Ethan didn't always have answers for, gently pushing him to examine assumptions he hadn't realized he was making. By the time they hung up, Ethan didn't feel less confused, but he felt less alone with it. He sat in his quiet living room, nursing the whiskey, and thought about what Naomi had said, about risk and fear, and the difference between protecting Mia and protecting himself. The truth was, Ethan had been so focused on not repeating his parents' mistakes, the instability, the chaos, the way they'd prioritized their own drama over their kids, that he'd maybe swung too far in the opposite direction. He'd made safety his religion, routine his ritual, and anything that threatened the status quo felt like a betrayal of everything he'd promised Mia. But was that really what was best for her, or was it just what felt safest for him? Ethan thought about Claire's face when she'd talked about missing being a mom. That wasn't manipulation or emotional blackmail. That was just grief, honest and raw. She was drowning in a loss he couldn't imagine, and she'd reached out to him because somewhere in her desperate calculations, he'd seemed like someone who might understand. And maybe he did understand in a way. Not the loss of a child, he couldn't comprehend that horror, but the loneliness of single parenthood. The feeling of carrying everything yourself because there was nobody else to share the weight. The fear that you were doing it all wrong, that your best would never be good enough. Claire had been alone with that for 5 years. No partner, no child, no family to support her. Just the echo of a life that had been stolen from her. What would it cost him, really, to at least talk to her again? To hear her out completely, instead of shutting her down immediately? He didn't have to say yes. He could still ultimately say no. But he could at least give her the courtesy of a real conversation instead of a panicked refusal. Ethan looked at the clock. Nearly 11. Too late to go over there tonight, and besides, he needed to think more carefully about what he wanted to say. But tomorrow he could text her, could ask if she wanted to talk again, could at least try to understand what she was really asking for instead of just reacting to the shock of it. The decision made, Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. He finished his whiskey, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. At Mia's doorway, he paused to watch her sleep, her face peaceful, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. "I'm trying to do right by you, Bug," he whispered. "I'm just not always sure what that means." Mia didn't answer, of course. She just breathed softly in the darkness, trusting completely that her father would keep her safe. Ethan went to his own room and lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine what his life might look like if he said yes to Claire. Trying to imagine what it might look like if he said no, and spent the rest of his life wondering what if. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool, the rain finally broken. Ethan made pancakes, Saturday was always pancakes, and watched Mia drench hers in syrup while he worked up the courage to send a text message. It took him 3 tries to get the wording right. "Claire, if you want to talk again, I'm here. No pressure, just, we should probably talk." He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then immediately regretted it. What if she didn't want to talk to him? What if she'd already decided he was a coward who'd turned his back on her when she needed help? What if... His phone buzzed. "Thank you. Yes. Today?" Ethan's heart hammered. "This afternoon? Mia has a play date at 2. I could come over after I drop her off. I'll be home." That was it. No elaboration, no emotion, just confirmation. Ethan spent the next few hours in a state of low-level anxiety, going through the motions of Saturday morning, cleaning the kitchen, doing laundry, playing board games with Mia. At 2 o'clock, he drove Mia to her friend Sophie's house for a play date that Sophie's mom had arranged, promising to pick her up at 5. Then, with no more excuses to delay, Ethan walked across the street and knocked on Claire's door. She answered almost immediately, like she'd been waiting just inside. She looked better than she had on Thursday night, showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back neatly. But there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd slept about as well as Ethan had. "Hi," she said quietly. "Come in." Claire's house was immaculate as always, but Ethan noticed things he hadn't before. How sparse it was, like she'd never fully committed to living here. How few personal touches there were. The photo on the mantel that was still turned face down. They sat in her living room, the same positions they'd been in Thursday night. Claire made tea again, maybe needing something to do with her hands, and they sat in awkward silence for a moment. "I'm sorry about the other night," Claire finally said. "I ambushed you. I was in a bad place emotionally, and I dumped all of that on you without any warning. That wasn't fair." "You don't need to apologize," Ethan said. "I mean, yes, it was shocking, but you were honest about what you needed. I can't fault you for that." Claire wrapped her hands around her mug. "I understand why you said no. You have Mia to think about. I shouldn't have put you in that position." "I didn't say no because I think you're a bad person," Ethan said carefully, "or because I don't trust you. I said no because I panicked, because what you were asking felt so enormous, and I couldn't see past the potential complications." "And now?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now I'm trying to actually think about it instead of just reacting. Which is why I wanted to talk again, because I have questions, a lot of questions, and I need to understand what you're really asking for before I can give you any kind of real answer." Claire nodded slowly. "Okay. Ask me anything." Ethan took a breath. "Why me? And I don't mean that in a self-deprecating way. I mean, you could go to a sperm bank. You could use a donor where there's legal protection, where everything's official and there's no risk of complications later. Why ask your neighbor who you barely know?" Claire was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea like it held answers. "Because those options feel empty," she said finally. "I'd be choosing from a catalog of statistics, height, weight, education, medical history, just numbers. No soul to it, no humanity. And I know that probably sounds irrational because the end result is the same either way, but I can't do it. I can't build a baby from a checklist." She looked up at Ethan, and he saw the raw honesty in her eyes. "When Emma was born, I knew everything about her father. I knew that Michael snorted when he laughed too hard, that he was terrified of spiders, that he always left his socks on the bathroom floor. I knew his favorite foods and his worst habits, and the way he looked at me like I was the most important thing in his world. And when I held Emma for the first time, I could see pieces of him in her, his nose, his stubborn chin, the way she'd scrunch up her face when she was thinking hard." Claire's voice cracked. "I want that again. I want to know the person whose DNA my child carries. I want to be able to tell them stories about their biological father that aren't just statistics from a medical form. I want them to be real." Ethan felt something shift in his chest. He'd been thinking about this purely in terms of logistics and complications, but Claire was thinking about legacy and connection and the fundamental humanity of creating life. "And you think I'm that person?" he asked softly. "I think you're a good person," Claire said. "I think you show up for your daughter every single day in ways that matter. I think you're patient and kind, and you fix things when they're broken. And yes, we don't know each other well, but I've watched you for 2 years. I've seen who you are when you think nobody's paying attention. That's worth more than any questionnaire." Ethan rubbed his face. "Claire, even if I said yes, do you understand how complicated this could get? What if you meet someone later and they're uncomfortable with this situation? What if the child wants to know me and I want to know them, but you've moved on with your life? What if there are medical issues that require my involvement? What if—" "I've thought about all of it," Claire interrupted. "I've spent months thinking about nothing else. And yes, it's complicated. Yes, there are 1,000 ways this could get messy. But Ethan, my life is already messy. I'm already drowning in complications and grief and loneliness. At least this way there's hope. At least this way I'm choosing to fight for something instead of just surviving." She leaned forward, and Ethan could see the desperation creeping back into her expression. I'm not asking you to be my co-parent. I'm not asking you to fall in love with me or marry me or turn your life upside down. I'm asking you to give me a chance at being a mother again. And if you want to be involved in this child's life, I would welcome that. If you want distance, I would respect that. We could work out whatever arrangement feels right for both of us. But what feels right now might not feel right in 5 years, Ethan pointed out. What if I want more involvement than you're comfortable with? What if you want less than I want to give? Then we'd figure it out, Claire said. We'd communicate. We'd prioritize what's best for the child. We'd be adults about it. I'm not naive enough to think this would be simple, but I also don't think it has to be a disaster. Ethan stood up, too agitated to sit still. He walked to her front window and looked out at his house across the street. He could see Mia's swing set in the backyard, the porch where he'd sat drinking coffee 1,000 mornings. I need you to understand something, he said without turning around. Mia is my whole world. Everything I've built, everything I am, it's all for her. If I do this, and I'm not saying I am, but if, then it can never threaten her stability. It can never make her feel like she's less important or like she's been replaced. I would never want that, Claire said quietly. Ethan turned to face her. You say that now. But what if Mia gets jealous? What if she sees me helping you with a baby and feels abandoned? She's already growing up without a mother. I can't let her feel like she's losing her father, too. Then we make sure she doesn't feel that way, Claire said. We include her. We let her be part of it in whatever way feels appropriate. We make it clear that she's not being replaced. She's gaining family. The word hung in the air between them. Family. Ethan sank back onto the couch. This is insane. You know that, right? People don't do this. People do all kinds of things, Claire said. Surrogacy, sperm donation, co-parenting between friends, adoptive families. There's no one right way to build a family. There's just the way that works for the people involved. And you think this could work? For us? Claire hesitated. I think it could, but only if we're both honest about what we want and what we're afraid of. Only if we communicate. Only if we put the child first, always. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd been shattered and was trying desperately to put herself back together. Someone who wasn't asking him to fix her, but to give her a tool she could use to fix herself. I need time, he said finally. I need to think about this more. Talk to people I trust. Figure out what this would actually look like. How much time? Claire asked, and he could hear the fear in her voice that he was just letting her down gently. I don't know. A few days? A week? I'm not saying no, Claire, but I'm also not saying yes yet. I'm saying I need to be sure. Claire nodded, and Ethan saw her eyes get wet. Thank you. That's more than I had any right to ask for. Ethan stood to leave, but paused at her door. Can I ask you something? Of course. The blanket you were holding Thursday night, the blue and yellow one, was that Emma's? Claire's face crumpled slightly. Yes, my mother made it for her when she was born. It's the only thing I kept from her room. Everything else I donated because I couldn't stand to look at it. But that blanket, I couldn't let it go. Ethan felt his throat tighten. I'm sorry for what you lost. Nobody should have to survive that. But I did survive it, Claire said softly. I'm still here, and I'm trying to figure out if surviving is enough or if I'm allowed to want to really live again. As Ethan walked back across the street to his empty house, her words echoed in his head. He thought about his own life. The careful routines, the risk aversion, the way he'd made his world smaller and smaller until it felt safe. Was he really living, or was he just surviving too? Ethan spent the rest of Saturday in a mental fog, going through the motions of picking up Mia from her play date and making dinner and getting her ready for bed, but his mind was elsewhere. Claire's words kept circling back, especially that last question about whether surviving was enough or if she was allowed to want to really live again. He recognized himself in that question more than he wanted to admit. Sunday morning, Ethan called Naomi again. This time David answered, his voice cheerful and relaxed. Hey Ethan, she's in the shower. Everything okay? Yeah, fine. Just needed to talk to her about something. The neighbor situation? David asked, and Ethan could hear the carefully neutral tone in his voice. She told you? We don't keep secrets, and for what it's worth, I don't think you're crazy for considering it. Unconventional, sure, but not crazy. Before Ethan could respond, he heard Naomi's voice in the background asking who was on the phone. David handed it over, and a moment later, Naomi was on the line. "You talked to her again," she said without preamble. "How did you know?" "Because you sound different than you did Friday night. Less panicked, more thoughtful." "What happened?" Ethan told her about the conversation, about Claire's reasoning for not wanting an anonymous donor, about her offer to let him be as involved or uninvolved as he wanted. "The thing is," Ethan said, pacing his kitchen, while Mia watched cartoons in the living room, "I keep trying to find a logical reason to say no, and I can't. Every objection I come up with, Claire has already thought about. Every worry I have, she's willing to address. And I keep thinking about what you said, about whether I'm protecting Mia or protecting myself." "And which one is it?" Naomi asked gently. "Both, maybe? I don't know. I keep thinking about worst-case scenarios. What if Claire meets someone and that person wants to adopt the baby and cut me out? What if the kid grows up resenting me for not being a real father? What if Mia feels replaced or abandoned?" "Those are all valid concerns," Naomi said. "But Ethan, you can't live your whole life avoiding risk because something might go wrong. Sometimes the bigger risk is never taking any chances at all." Ethan leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. "I barely know her, Naomi. We're neighbors who've been friendly, but we don't really know each other. How am I supposed to make a decision this big with someone I don't really know?" "So get to know her," Naomi said simply. "Not because you've decided yes or no, but because you need more information. Spend time with her. Have real conversations. Figure out who she actually is beyond the grieving widow you've built up in your head." "What do I tell Mia?" "Hey, Bug, Daddy's spending more time with Miss Claire because he might help her have a baby?" "You don't tell her anything yet," Naomi said firmly. "You're nowhere near that point. You just tell her you and Miss Claire are becoming better friends. Kids understand friendship. They don't need to know all the complicated adult stuff until there's actually something to tell." After they hung up, Ethan stood in his kitchen thinking about what it would mean to really get to know Claire. Not as a neighbor who fixed her appliances and accepted her baked goods, but as a person. As someone he might be tied to for the rest of his life if he said yes to this impossible request. Monday at work, Ethan found himself distracted during a refrigerator repair, nearly ordering the wrong part because he wasn't paying attention. Tom noticed and pulled him aside during lunch. "You've been off all week," Tom said, unwrapping a sandwich. "Woman trouble?" Ethan almost laughed at how everyone seemed to assume that was the problem. "It's complicated." "It always is." "You going to tell me about it? Or are you going to keep running the risk of ordering $300 compressors for units that just need a $20 thermostat?" So Ethan told him, leaving out some of the more personal details but hitting the main points. Tom listened while he ate, his weathered face thoughtful. "That's heavy," Tom said when Ethan finished. "Real heavy. But I'll tell you what my old man told me when I was trying to decide whether to buy this business 30 years ago. He said, 'Son, you can't logic your way through every decision. Sometimes you gotta feel your way through it.'" "What's that supposed to mean?" Ethan asked. "It means stop trying to predict every possible outcome and start paying attention to what your gut is telling you. You keep listing all these logical reasons to say no, but you're still thinking about it, which tells me your gut is saying something different than your head." "My gut has been wrong before," Ethan said quietly, thinking about Jessica, about how sure he'd been that they could make it work. "Maybe. But living scared of your own instincts isn't living at all. It's just hiding." Tom crumpled up his sandwich wrapper and tossed it in the trash. "Whatever you decide, make sure it's because you actually chose it, not because you were too afraid to choose anything else." That evening, Ethan texted Claire before he could overthink it. "Would you want to have dinner this week, just the two of us, somewhere we can actually talk?" Her response came quickly. "I'd like that. When?" "Wednesday? I can get a sitter for Mia." "Wednesday works." They agreed on a small Italian place downtown, the kind of restaurant that was casual enough not to feel like a date, but nice enough to signal that this conversation mattered. Ethan spent Tuesday in a low-level state of anxiety, second-guessing his decision to do this, wondering if he was giving Claire false hope or setting himself up for a disaster. Wednesday afternoon, he picked up Mia from school and drove her to Naomi's house in Portland. His sister had offered to take Mia for the night when Ethan mentioned he needed to have a serious conversation with Claire. "You don't have to explain the details to Mia," Naomi had said. "Just tell her Aunt Naomi missed her and wanted a sleepover. We'll make cookies and watch movies, and she'll have a great time." Mia was thrilled at the unexpected sleepover, chattering the whole drive about what movies she wanted to watch with Aunt Naomi and Uncle David. Ethan walked her to the door, and Naomi gave him a quick hug and a look that said she was rooting for him, whatever he decided. The drive back to Eugene felt longer than usual. Ethan had an hour before he needed to meet Claire, so he went home and changed out of his work clothes, trying on 3 different shirts before settling on a simple button-down that felt appropriate without looking like he was trying too hard. He arrived at the restaurant 5 minutes early and found Claire already there, sitting in a booth near the back. She wore a dark green sweater and had her hair down for once, and Ethan realized with a start that he'd never really looked at her as a woman before. She'd always been his neighbor, his friend maybe, the person he helped with household repairs. But sitting there in the soft restaurant lighting, Claire was just a person, nervous and hopeful, and trying to figure out if her life could be anything more than the grief she'd been carrying. "Hi," she said as he slid into the booth across from her. "I ordered water for both of us. Hope that's okay." "That's fine." Ethan picked up his menu but couldn't focus on it. "Thanks for doing this." "Thank you for asking," Claire said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would want to see me again after Saturday. I told you I needed time to think. This is part of that." They ordered food, pasta for Claire, chicken parmesan for Ethan, and then sat in awkward silence until the waitress brought bread. Finally, Ethan decided to just dive in. "Tell me about your life before," he said. "Before the accident. I want to understand who you were when you had everything you wanted." Claire's eyes widened slightly, like she hadn't expected the question. She broke off a piece of bread, turning it over in her fingers. "I met Michael in college," she began slowly. "University of Washington. I was studying design and he was in engineering, and we met at this terrible off-campus party that neither of us wanted to be at. We bonded over hiding in the kitchen, making fun of everyone else." A small smile touched her lips at the memory. He was smart and funny and so confident in this quiet way, like he knew exactly who he was and didn't need anyone's approval. Ethan watched emotions play across her face as she talked. Fondness, pain, a deep ache for what she'd lost. "We got married right after graduation. I started freelancing as a graphic designer. He got a job at a tech company in Seattle. We had this tiny apartment in Capitol Hill, barely enough room for both of us, but it was ours. We talked about kids, but wanted to wait, save money, establish our careers. And then one night we were out to dinner and Michael just looked at me and said, 'I don't want to wait anymore. Let's have a baby.'" Claire's voice cracked slightly. "Emma was born 10 months later. And I know everyone says this about their kids, but she was perfect. So perfect it scared me sometimes. I kept waiting for something to go wrong because nothing that good could last." "And you were right," Ethan said softly. "I was right," Claire whispered. "She was 4 years and 7 months old when we lost her. Still believed in magic, still thought the world was safe. She had this laugh that sounded like wind chimes, and she insisted on wearing her princess dress to the grocery store, and she'd make up songs about whatever she was doing. This is the song about brushing teeth, brushing teeth, brushing teeth." Claire's voice broke completely. Ethan reached across the table instinctively and covered her hand with his. Claire looked down at their hands, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I thought I could talk about her without falling apart." "You don't have to apologize. And you don't have to talk about it if it's too hard." "No, I want to. I need to." Claire took a shaky breath. "After they died, I spent 6 months in this fog where I couldn't feel anything. I went to therapy because people told me I had to, but I didn't care about getting better. I didn't care about anything. My parents wanted me to move back to Ohio, but I couldn't stand the thought of living in my childhood bedroom like some kind of broken failure, so I just existed. Showed up to work, came home, went to sleep, over and over. Their food arrived, and they both pretended to eat while Claire continued talking, the words coming faster now like a dam breaking. About a year after the accident, something shifted. I don't know what triggered it, but I woke up one morning and realized I was angry, furious, at the drunk driver,
at the universe, at Michael for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, at myself for not being in the car with them. And the anger felt better than the numbness, so I held on to it. Let it fuel me.
I quit my job in Seattle, moved to Eugene because I'd never been here, and it felt far enough away. Started over. And that worked? Ethan asked gently. For a while. I built a new life, made myself functional, stopped crying every day. But the thing about anger is it burns out eventually, and when it did, I was left with this hollow space where my family used to be. I'd go to Target and see mothers with their daughters and have to leave my cart and walk out because I couldn't breathe. I'd hear kids laughing in the neighborhood and want to scream at them to be quiet because it hurt too much. Claire finally looked up at Ethan, her eyes red but clear. About 6 months ago, I realized I had a choice. I could keep living this half-life, going through the motions, pretending to be okay, or I could try to actually build something real again. And I don't mean replace Emma. You can't replace a child you've lost. But I could honor her memory by not letting her death be the end of my entire life. Is that when you started thinking about having another baby? Ethan asked. That's when I started letting myself think about it, Claire corrected. The thought had been there for a long time, but I kept pushing it away because it felt like betrayal. Like I was trying to forget Emma. But she wouldn't want me to stop living. She'd want me to be happy. And being a mother, that was when I was happiest. That was when I felt most like myself. Ethan absorbed this, trying to imagine the weight of carrying that kind of loss. Why not try to meet someone, date, find a partner who'd want to build a family with you? Claire gave a bitter laugh. I tried. About a year ago, I made myself download dating apps, went on a few dates with men who seemed nice enough, but the second they'd ask about my past, about whether I wanted kids, I'd freeze up. How do you tell someone on a second date that you had a daughter who died? That you're grieving a whole life that doesn't exist anymore? Most guys ran. The ones who didn't had this look of pity that made me want to crawl out of my skin. Not everyone would react that way, Ethan said. Maybe not, but I don't have the energy to sort through all the people who would to find the ones who wouldn't. I'm 33. My biological clock isn't just ticking, it's basically an air horn at this point. I don't have time to spend years dating, hoping to find someone who can handle my baggage and wants a family and is willing to take on a relationship with someone as damaged as I am. You're not damaged, Ethan said firmly. I'm something, Claire said. I'm definitely not the same person I was before. And maybe someday I'll meet someone who can love this version of me. But I can't put my entire future on hold waiting for that to happen. I need to do something now while I still can. Their waitress came by to check on them, and they both made a show of eating a few bites. When she left, Ethan leaned back in the booth, studying Claire's face. Can I ask you something that might sound harsh? Go ahead. How do I know this isn't just desperation? Grief making you grasp for something to fill the hole Emma left? How do I know you're ready to be a mother again and not just trying to use a baby to avoid dealing with your loss? Claire didn't flinch from the question. You don't know that. I don't completely know that, but I've been in therapy for 5 years. I've done the work. I've processed the grief as much as anyone can process something like that. And yes, part of why I want this is because I miss being a mother. But it's not about replacement. It's about rebuilding. She leaned forward, her expression intense. I know what I'm getting into. I know a baby won't fix me. I know there will be hard moments where grief hits me all over again. But I also know I have love to give. I have space in my life for a child. I have the financial stability and the emotional capacity and the genuine desire to be a parent again. That has to count for something. Ethan thought about this while he pushed pasta around his plate. What would you want from me if I said yes? What does this actually look like? Claire took a breath. Honestly, I've thought about that constantly, and I still don't have a perfect answer. At minimum, I'd want you to be willing to be honest with the child about their biological origins when they're old enough to understand. I wouldn't lie to them about where they came from. And maximum? Ethan asked. Maximum. Maybe you'd want to be part of their life. Uncle Ethan who comes to birthday parties and brings Christmas presents. Someone they could go to if they needed you. But that would be entirely up to you. I wouldn't demand anything beyond what you were comfortable giving. What about legal stuff, parental rights? We'd need to talk to a lawyer, Claire said. Work out an agreement that protects both of us. I'm not trying to trap you or come after you for child support or anything like that. I have a good income. I can support a child financially. I just want clarity on what our roles are so nobody gets hurt. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, feeling the enormity of what they were discussing. This is insane. You know that, right? We're sitting in an Italian restaurant negotiating the terms of creating a human life like it's a business deal. I know, Claire said quietly. Believe me, I know how it sounds. I've played this conversation in my head 1,000 times, and it always sounds crazy. But crazy doesn't mean wrong. They sat in silence for a moment. The restaurant buzzed with other conversations, other lives, other people with normal problems that didn't involve impossible decisions. Tell me about Mia, Claire said finally. What made you want to be a father? The question caught Ethan off guard. I didn't at first. Mia wasn't planned. Jessica and I had been together for 2 years. We were both young, and when she got pregnant, I was terrified. I wasn't ready. I had no idea what I was doing. But then Mia was born, and I looked at her and just everything else stopped mattering. Ethan smiled, remembering. She was so tiny, so perfect, and I knew in that moment that I would do anything to protect her, that she was the most important thing that would ever happen to me. And I've spent every day since trying to live up to that promise. You're a good father, Claire said. I've watched you with her. The patience you have, the way you listen to her like what she's saying actually matters. A lot of parents don't do that. I'm trying. That's all any of us can do. Ethan paused. What scares you most about doing this alone? Claire considered the question. Everything. What if I'm not enough? What if I screw up this kid because I'm so broken from losing Emma that I can't parent properly? What if I'm too overprotective or not protective enough? What if... She stopped herself. But I guess every parent worries about those things. They do, Ethan confirmed. I worry about those things every single day. But you show up anyway, Claire said. That's what matters, right? You show up and you try and you love them as hard as you can and hope it's enough. Ethan thought about Mia, about all the ways he worried he was failing her. But Claire was right. He showed up. Every single day, no matter how hard it was, he showed up. If I did this, Ethan said slowly, and I'm not saying I am, but if I did, I'd need to know that Mia comes first, always, that my relationship with her doesn't change, that she doesn't feel threatened or replaced. I would never want that, Claire said fiercely. Mia is wonderful. She deserves to feel secure and loved, and if anything, I'd hope she could be part of this in some way. That she could have a relationship with her half-sibling if that's something you both wanted. The words half-sibling hit Ethan hard. He'd been thinking about this in abstract terms, helping Claire, making a choice, managing complications. But Claire was talking about creating a connection between Mia and another child, about giving his daughter a sister or brother. I need more time, Ethan said. I need to think about how this would actually work, how to explain it to Mia when she's old enough to understand, how to make sure everyone's protected legally, how to... Ethan, Claire interrupted gently. I'm not asking you to figure out everything tonight. I'm just asking you to consider it, really consider it. Not as this impossible thing, but as something that could actually happen if we both wanted it to. They paid the bill and walked out into the cool October night. In the parking lot, they stood by Claire's car, neither quite ready to end the conversation. Thank you for dinner, Claire said, for listening, for not running away screaming. Thank you for being honest with me, Ethan replied. About all of it. Claire hesitated, then spoke carefully. Can I tell you something that might make this weirder? It's already pretty weird. Might as well go all in. I care about you, Claire said, her voice soft in the darkness. Not in a romantic way necessarily, but as a person. You've been kind to me when you didn't have to be. You've shown up when I needed help. You've treated me like a human being instead of a tragic story. That matters more than you know. Ethan felt something shift in his chest. I care about you too. That's why this is so hard. If I say yes and something goes wrong, I lose a friend. If I say no, I might lose a friend anyway. Or maybe we figure it out together, Claire said. Maybe we trust each other enough to navigate the complications. Maybe we believe that we're both decent enough people to put a child's well-being first, no matter what happens. She unlocked her car, but didn't get in. I know you need time. Take all the time you need. I'll be here either way. Ethan drove home in silence, his mind spinning. He thought about Claire's story, about the life she'd lost, and the life she was trying to build. He thought about Emma, the little girl who'd loved princess dresses and made up songs. He thought about Michael, the man who'd known exactly who he was. And he thought about Mia, about what it would mean to tell her someday that she had a half-sibling, about whether that would be a gift or a complication. When he got home, the house felt too quiet. Ethan poured himself a drink and sat on the couch, staring at his phone. Naomi had sent a picture of Mia covered in flour, grinning wildly, with a text that said, "Cookie chaos, she's having the best time." Ethan smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that came with knowing his daughter was happy and safe. But underneath that warmth was something else, a question he'd been avoiding. Was he really protecting Mia by keeping their life small and controlled? Or was he teaching her that love was something to be afraid of, that opening yourself to other people was too dangerous to risk? His phone buzzed with another text, this one from Claire. "Thank you again for tonight. I know this isn't easy. Whatever you decide, I'm grateful you're actually thinking about it instead of just shutting me down." Ethan stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'm scared. Of all of it. Of making the wrong choice. Of hurting people. Of letting myself want something that might blow up in my face." Claire's response came quickly. "Being scared doesn't mean you're wrong. Sometimes it just means something matters enough to be scary." Ethan read those words 3 times. Something matters enough to be scary. That was the truth he'd been dancing around. This mattered. Claire mattered. The possibility of giving her hope mattered. And yes, it was terrifying, but maybe that was okay. He thought about what Tom had said about feeling his way through instead of trying to logic everything to death. He thought about Naomi's question about whether he was protecting Mia or protecting himself. He thought about Claire asking if surviving was enough or if she was allowed to want to really live again. And sitting in his quiet house, Ethan realized that the same question applied to him. He texted Claire back, "Can you come over tomorrow night after I put Mia to bed? I think I know what I want to say." Her response was immediate. "Yes. What time?" 8:30. "I'll be there." Ethan set down his phone and sat in the darkness, feeling terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. He didn't know if he was about to make the best decision of his life or the worst mistake. He didn't know if this would bring healing or chaos. He didn't know anything for certain, but he knew he was tired of being afraid, tired of living so small, tired of letting fear make all his decisions. Tomorrow night, he'd tell Claire yes, and then they'd figure out together what came next. Ethan barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind alternating between conviction and panic. One moment, he felt certain this was right, that helping Claire was something he was meant to do. The next moment, he was convinced he was making a catastrophic mistake that would blow up both their lives. By the time dawn broke, Ethan had mentally rehearsed the conversation with Claire at least 50 times, each version slightly different, each one feeling inadequate. He drove to Portland early to pick up Mia, arriving at Naomi's house just as she was making breakfast. Mia launched herself at him the moment he walked through the door, chattering excitedly about the cookies they'd made and the movie they'd watched, and how Uncle David had done funny voices for all the characters. "She was perfect," Naomi said, handing Ethan a cup of coffee. "Went to bed without any fuss, woke up cheerful. You've got a good kid there." "I know," Ethan said, watching Mia show David a drawing she'd made. Naomi studied his face. "You look like you didn't sleep at all. How did dinner go?" "Can we talk outside for a minute?" They stepped onto the back porch while David kept Mia distracted. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't yet fallen. "I'm going to say yes," Ethan said without preamble. "I'm going to tell Claire tonight that I'll help her." Naomi was quiet for a moment, searching his face. "Are you sure? Because yesterday you sounded like you were still trying to decide." "I'm not sure of anything," Ethan admitted. "But I keep coming back to the same thought. If I say no, I'm choosing fear. I'm choosing to play it safe because I'm scared of what might happen if I take a risk. And that's not the person I want to be. That's not what I want to teach Mia about how to live." "What changed?" Naomi asked gently. Ethan thought about Claire's question in the parking lot about whether surviving was enough. "Claire told me about her daughter, about Emma, And listening to her talk about what she lost, I realized I've been thinking about this all wrong. I've been treating this like it's about me, my risk, my comfort, my fear. But it's not about me. It's about whether I can help someone who's drowning find a reason to keep swimming. That's noble, Naomi said carefully. But Ethan, you can't sacrifice your own well-being or Mia's just to save someone else. That's not sustainable. I'm not sacrificing anything, Ethan said. That's what I realized last night. Claire isn't asking me to give up anything. She's asking me to say yes to something, to be open to possibility instead of shutting it down out of fear. And yeah, it's complicated and messy, and there are 1,000 ways it could go wrong, but there are also ways it could go right. Naomi wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. Have you thought about how you'll tell Mia? Not now, obviously, but eventually? Not in detail, but I will. Claire and I will figure it out together. Ethan paused. I keep thinking about what you said about kids needing to see their parents living full lives. Maybe this is part of that. Maybe Mia needs to see that it's okay to help people even when it's scary, that family can look different than what we expect. And if Claire meets someone down the line, someone who wants to be that child's father and doesn't want you involved, then we'll deal with it, Ethan said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. We'll communicate. We'll prioritize what's best for the kid. We'll be adults about it. It won't be perfect, but nothing ever is. Naomi studied him for a long moment, then pulled him into a hug. I'm proud of you. I'm scared for you too, but I'm proud. You're choosing to be brave. Or choosing to be stupid, Ethan said into her shoulder. Sometimes those are the same thing, Naomi said. But I don't think this is stupid. I think it's kind. And the world needs more kindness. The drive back to Eugene felt different than usual. Mia sang along to the radio in the back seat, and Ethan found himself really listening to her voice instead of tuning it out, thinking about what it might be like for her to have a sibling someday, even if that relationship looked nothing like traditional siblings. They spent the afternoon doing normal weekend things, grocery shopping, laundry, playing in the backyard. Ethan tried to be present, to focus on Mia instead of obsessing over what he'd say to Claire that night, but his mind kept drifting, planning and replanning the conversation. After dinner, Ethan gave Mia her bath and read her an extra chapter of their book. She was getting sleepy, her eyes drooping as he read about the princess learning to control her magical powers. "Daddy?" Mia mumbled as he closed the book. "Yeah, Bug? Are you okay? You seem sad." Ethan's heart clenched. "I'm not sad, sweetheart, just thinking about some grown-up stuff." "Is it about work?" "Something like that," Ethan said, kissing her forehead. "But don't worry about it. Everything's fine." "If you're worried about something, you can tell Miss Claire," Mia said seriously. "She's really good at listening. She helped me when I was worried about the math test." Ethan hadn't known that. "When did you talk to Miss Claire about your math test?" "Last week when we brought her those tomatoes from the store. I told her I was scared I'd get the problems wrong, and she said everyone gets things wrong sometimes, and that's how we learn. It made me feel better." Something warm spread through Ethan's chest. That was good advice. "She's really nice," Mia said, yawning. "I wish she wasn't so lonely sometimes." "What makes you think she's lonely?" Ethan asked, curious. "She just seems like she's waiting for something. Like how I wait for you to come home from work, except she's waiting all the time." Mia's eyes were nearly closed now. "I think she'd be a really good mommy." The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Out of the mouths of babes, as the saying went. Mia had seen something in Claire that Ethan was only beginning to understand. That grief and loneliness and that constant waiting for something to fill the emptiness. "I think she would be too," Ethan said softly. "Love you, Daddy," Mia mumbled, already halfway to sleep. "Love you more than all the stars in the sky." "Love you more than all the fish in the ocean," she whispered, and then she was out. Ethan sat in her doorway for a long moment, watching her sleep, feeling the weight of what he was about to do. This decision would ripple through both their lives in ways he couldn't fully predict. But Mia's words echoed in his head. She'd be a really good mommy. Even his 6-year-old daughter could see that Claire had love to give. At 8:15, Ethan went downstairs and paced the living room, too nervous to sit still. He checked his phone compulsively, even though he knew Claire wouldn't text before showing up. He tried to rehearse what he wanted to say, but the words kept jumbling together. At exactly 8:30, there was a soft knock on the door. Ethan opened it to find Claire on his porch, looking as nervous as he felt. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked young and vulnerable and terrified. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi, come in." They sat in the same positions as before, Ethan in his usual chair, Claire on the couch. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock in the kitchen and the distant hum of the refrigerator. "Do you want tea or—" Ethan started. "I'm too nervous to drink anything," Claire said. "I might throw up." Ethan almost laughed at the honesty. "Yeah, me too." They sat in tense silence for a moment. Claire's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. "I should just say it," Ethan said finally, "before I lose my nerve." Claire looked up at him, her eyes wide and hopeful and scared. "I'm saying yes," Ethan said, the words coming out in a rush. "I'll help you. I want to help you." Claire's face crumpled. She pressed her hands to her mouth and tears started streaming down her cheeks. For a long moment she couldn't speak, just sat there crying while Ethan felt his own eyes get wet. "Are you sure?" she finally managed to say. "Because, Ethan, if you're not completely sure, if you're just doing this because you feel sorry for me—" "I'm terrified," Ethan interrupted. "I'm not sure of anything except that I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. And I keep thinking about what you said, about whether surviving is enough or if you're allowed to want to really live. That question applies to me too. I've been surviving, Claire. I've been building this careful, controlled life where nothing can hurt me or Mia. But that's not living. That's just hiding." He leaned forward, needing her to understand. "You asked me for something impossible and I panicked. But you also showed me that I've been playing it too safe, that there's more to life than just protecting myself from risk. And yeah, this scares me. It scares me so much I can barely breathe when I think about all the ways it could go wrong, but I'd rather be scared and actually doing something than safe and wondering what if for the rest of my life." Claire was openly crying now. "Thank you. God, thank you. You have no idea what this means to me." "I think I do," Ethan said softly. "I saw your face when you were talking about Emma. I heard how much you miss being a mom. I know this isn't about replacing her or trying to fix what happened. This is about honoring her memory by not letting grief be the end of your story." Claire wiped at her tears with shaking hands. "I promise you I won't take advantage of this. I promise I'll respect whatever boundaries you need. I promise—" "Claire, stop," Ethan said gently. "We're not going into this with you owing me promises. We're going into this as partners figuring it out together, which means we need to have some serious conversations about how this actually works." Claire nodded, trying to compose herself. "Okay, yes. What do you need to know?" "Everything," Ethan said. "We need to talk to a lawyer. We need to figure out legal protections for both of us. We need to decide how involved I'm going to be in this child's life. We need to plan for every scenario we can think of so we're not making it up as we go." "I agree," Claire said. "I've already done some research on lawyers who specialize in non-traditional family arrangements. There's a woman in Portland who's supposed to be excellent. We could set up a consultation." "Good. And we need to talk about the practical stuff. Doctor's appointments, medical decisions, how we handle questions from other people. We need to be on the same page about all of it." Claire pulled out her phone, opening a notes app. "I've been making lists. Is that weird? I've been making lists of things we'd need to discuss." "That's not weird. That's smart," Ethan said. "Show me." She handed him her phone, and Ethan scrolled through pages of notes. Questions about prenatal care and birth plans and childcare. Thoughts on how to explain the situation to the child as they grew up. Ideas about maintaining boundaries while still allowing flexibility. It was clear Claire had been thinking about this obsessively, trying to anticipate every possible complication. "This is thorough," Ethan said, impressed despite himself. "I've had a lot of time to think about it," Claire said. "I know I sprung this on you suddenly, but I've been planning it in my head for months. I just needed to work up the courage to actually ask." "What made you finally ask? Why that night specifically?" Claire's expression turned pained. "It was Emma's birthday. She would have been 9, and I spent the whole day alone in my house trying not to fall apart, and by evening I just couldn't take it anymore. I looked across the street and saw your lights on and thought, he'll understand. He has a daughter. He knows what it means to love a child. If anyone would understand why I need this, it's him. Ethan felt his throat tighten. I wish you'd told me it was her birthday. How do you tell someone that? Hey, it's the 9th birthday of my dead daughter. Can you father my child? Claire let out a shaky laugh. It sounds insane, no matter how you phrase it. It doesn't sound insane, Ethan said. It sounds like grief. And grief makes us do desperate things sometimes. They talked for another hour, going through Claire's lists, adding questions Ethan had thought of, trying to anticipate scenarios neither of them had considered. It was businesslike in some ways, two people negotiating the terms of something that should have been romantic and spontaneous, but was instead careful and calculated. But underneath the practical discussion was something else, a growing understanding that they were both choosing to be vulnerable with each other, that they were building trust in real time, learning to communicate about hard things, establishing patterns that would matter later. What do we tell people? Claire asked eventually. Friends, family, neighbors? The truth, I think, or as much of it as they need to know. Ethan thought about it. I'll tell my sister everything. She already knows I was considering this. But for everyone else, we could just say we're friends who decided to have a child together. People don't need all the details. What about Mia? This was the question Ethan had been dreading. Not yet. She's 6. She doesn't need to know anything until there's actually something to know. And when we do tell her, we tell her together. We make it clear that this doesn't change anything about her life or how much I love her. Do you think she'll be upset? Claire asked quietly. I don't know. Maybe. But kids are resilient, and Mia, she actually mentioned you tonight. Said she thought you'd be a really good mommy. Claire's eyes filled with tears again. She said that? She said you seem lonely, that you're always waiting for something. She's perceptive, my kid. She's incredible, Claire said. You've done such a good job with her, Ethan. She's kind and smart and so full of life. That's all you. That's both of us eventually, Ethan said. If we do this right. If we raise these kids to know each other and care about each other. The word kids, plural, hung in the air between them. The reality of what they were planning suddenly felt very concrete. I'm going to mess this up sometimes, Claire said. I'm going to have moments where grief hits me out of nowhere and I'm not okay. I'm going to compare the new baby to Emma, even though I know I shouldn't. You're going to be human, Ethan interrupted, and that's okay. I'm going to mess up too. I'm going to worry too much about Mia and not enough about fairness. I'm going to second guess this decision at 3 a.m. We're both going to struggle, but we'll struggle together. Claire looked at him with such gratitude that Ethan felt uncomfortable with the intensity of it. How are you so calm about this? A week ago you said no, and now you're planning like it's already decided. I'm not calm, Ethan admitted. I'm faking it. Inside I'm completely freaking out. But I learned a long time ago that sometimes you just have to commit to something and trust that you'll figure it out as you go. Is that what you did with Mia? That's exactly what I did with Mia. I had no idea how to be a father. I was terrified I'd screw her up. But I showed up every day and I tried my best and somehow it worked out. Claire smiled through her tears. You're giving me more hope than you know. They talked until nearly midnight, going over details and asking questions, and slowly building the framework of an agreement that would shape both their lives. By the time Claire finally stood to leave, they'd covered everything from medical insurance to custody arrangements to how they'd handle holidays. At the door, Claire paused and turned back to Ethan. Can I hug you? Is that weird? It's not weird, Ethan said, and opened his arms. Claire stepped into his embrace and held on tight, and Ethan felt her shaking with emotion. He held her, this woman who was trusting him with her most desperate hope, and felt the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. We're really doing this, Claire whispered against his shoulder. We're really doing this, Ethan confirmed. When she pulled back, Claire's eyes were red but clear. I'll call that lawyer tomorrow. Set up a consultation for next week? Sounds good. And Claire, we take this slow. We do everything right. We don't rush just because you're worried about your biological clock. Agreed, Claire said. We do this right, or we don't do it at all. After she left, Ethan stood in his quiet house feeling like he'd just made either the best decision of his life or signed up for a disaster he couldn't yet imagine. But underneath the fear was something else, a sense of purpose, of doing something that mattered beyond just getting through another day. He checked on Mia one more time before bed, watching her sleep with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest. "I'm trying to do right by you, Bug," he whispered. "I'm trying to show you that it's okay to be brave, that love is worth the risk." The following weeks were a blur of activity. Ethan and Claire met with the lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in alternative family arrangements. She asked hard questions and made them think through scenarios they hadn't considered. They drafted an agreement that outlined rights and responsibilities, established that Ethan wasn't obligated to provide financial support but could choose to, and laid out a framework for how they'd handle major decisions. "This is the most thorough, non-traditional arrangement I've seen," Patricia said at their second meeting. "You two have really thought this through." "We're trying to," Ethan said. "We want to do this right." They met with Claire's doctor next, a kind woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez, who didn't bat an eye at their unconventional situation. She ran tests, confirmed Claire's fertility was good, and explained the process matter-of-factly. "You have a few options," Dr. Martinez said. "Home insemination is the cheapest and simplest. Clinical insemination has higher success rates but costs more. IVF is the most expensive but gives you the most control." They chose home insemination after Claire insisted she didn't want to spend thousands of dollars on clinical procedures when there was a simpler option. Dr. Martinez gave them information packets and instructions and scheduled a follow-up in a month. The first attempt was awkward and clinical, and nothing like either of them had imagined creating life would be. Ethan dropped off what was needed, Claire handled the rest, and then they waited 2 weeks in anxious silence before the pregnancy test came back negative. "It's okay," Claire said when she called to tell him. "The doctor said it usually takes a few tries." The second attempt was also negative, so was the third. By the fourth month, Ethan could hear the desperation creeping into Claire's voice. "What if it doesn't work? What if I waited too long and now my body won't cooperate?" "Then we try other options," Ethan said calmly. "We don't give up after 4 months. The doctor said it could take up to a year." "I don't know if I can handle a year of this," Claire admitted. "The hoping and waiting and being disappointed over and over." "You're not doing it alone," Ethan reminded her. "I'm here. We're in this together." During those months of trying and failing, something shifted between them. They talked more, shared more, became actual friends instead of just neighbors with an agreement. Ethan learned that Claire loved old movies and terrible reality TV, that she'd wanted to be an artist when she was young, but her parents had pushed her toward something more practical, that she still had Emma's room perfectly preserved in her old house in Seattle, couldn't bring herself to dismantle it even though she'd moved away. Claire learned that Ethan had always wanted to be an engineer but couldn't afford college after his parents' divorce. That he loved fixing things because it gave him a sense of control in a chaotic world. That he played guitar sometimes late at night when he couldn't sleep, but never in front of anyone because he was self-conscious about his voice. They developed rhythms. Friday dinners together after Mia went to bed, Saturday morning coffee on Claire's porch, Sunday afternoon walks when the weather was nice. Mia started asking why Daddy spent so much time with Miss Claire, and Ethan told her they'd become good friends. "Are you boyfriend and girlfriend?" Mia asked one night, her eyes wide with curiosity. "No, Bug, just friends." "But you could be," Mia said seriously. "She's really pretty, and she makes really good cookies, and she doesn't have a boyfriend." Ethan had smiled and kissed her forehead and changed the subject, but the question lingered. What exactly were he and Claire becoming? They weren't romantic partners, but they were bonded in a way that went deeper than friendship. They were building something together, a future that would tie them to each other for the rest of their lives. The 5th month, Claire called him at work, her voice shaking but different than the previous disappointments. "Ethan, can you come over after your shift? I need to show you something." He finished his last repair in record time and drove to Claire's house with his heart hammering. She answered the door with a strange expression on her face, hope and fear and disbelief all mixed together. She held out a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. "Oh my God," Ethan breathed. "I took 3 more," Claire said, her voice breaking. "They're all positive. I'm pregnant. We're pregnant. This is happening." Ethan felt a rush of emotions so intense he couldn't separate them. Joy and terror and wonder and a strange sense of rightness that this impossible thing was actually becoming real. Claire was crying now, holding the pregnancy test like it was the most precious thing in the world. I can't believe it worked. I was starting to think it never would. It worked, Ethan said, and then he was pulling her into a hug and they were both crying and laughing and trying to process what this meant. They were going to have a baby. They stood in Claire's living room holding each other while reality slowly settled around them like snow. A baby. An actual baby that would be born in roughly 9 months, changing everything in ways they'd planned for but couldn't truly comprehend until this moment. I need to call Dr. Martinez, Claire said, pulling back and wiping her eyes. Schedule the first ultrasound. Start prenatal vitamins. There's so much to do. Hey, Ethan said gently, taking her shoulders. Breathe. We have time. Claire nodded, but he could see the panic starting to creep in behind the joy. What if something goes wrong? What if I miscarry? What if... We take it one day at a time, Ethan interrupted. We don't borrow trouble. Right now, in this moment, you're pregnant and everything is okay. She took a shaky breath and nodded again, and Ethan could see her trying to center herself, trying not to spiral into worst-case scenarios. When do we tell Mia? Claire asked. That was the question Ethan had been dreading. Not yet. Let's wait until after the first trimester when the risk of miscarriage drops. Give ourselves time to process this before we bring her into it. That makes sense, Claire said. But Ethan, she's going to have questions. She's already asking why we spend so much time together. I know. We'll figure it out. Ethan ran his hand through his hair, feeling the weight of what they'd done settling onto his shoulders. This is really happening. Are you having second thoughts? Claire asked quietly, vulnerability clear in her voice. No. Yes. Maybe. Ethan let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I'm terrified, Claire. But I was terrified when Mia was born too, and that turned out okay. Fear doesn't mean I made the wrong choice. The first trimester was harder than either of them expected. Claire was sick constantly, barely able to keep food down, exhausted in a way that made it hard for her to work. Ethan found himself checking on her more frequently, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, making sure she was eating enough even when everything made her nauseous. You don't have to do this, Claire said one evening when Ethan showed up with soup he'd made. You're not obligated to take care of me. I want to, Ethan said simply. We're in this together, remember? The first ultrasound came at 8 weeks. Ethan had debated whether to go. This was Claire's medical appointment, technically none of his business. But when she'd asked if he wanted to come, the hope in her voice had made the decision for him. They sat in Dr. Martinez's waiting room surrounded by couples, and Ethan was acutely aware of how they must look, a man and woman clearly together, but with none of the casual intimacy of actual partners. They sat with careful space between them, didn't hold hands, didn't touch. Brooks and Holloway? The nurse called. In the exam room, doctor. Martinez was warm and professional as always. Let's see how things are progressing, she said, squeezing gel onto Claire's stomach. The ultrasound screen flickered to life, showing grainy black and white images that meant nothing to Ethan at first. Then Dr. Martinez pointed to a small flutter on the screen. There's the heartbeat, she said, strong and steady. Ethan stared at that tiny flutter, barely visible, impossibly small, and felt something crack open in his chest. That was a life, a person. Half him, half Claire, completely its own being. Claire was crying silently, her eyes fixed on the screen. That's really the baby? That's really the baby, Dr. Martinez confirmed. Measuring right on track for 8 weeks. Everything looks good. They left the appointment with ultrasound photos that Claire clutched like precious artifacts. In the parking lot, she turned to Ethan with tears still streaming down her face. Thank you, she said. For being here, for doing this, for giving me this chance. You don't have to keep thanking me, Ethan said, though his own voice was rough with emotion. I do, though. Because you saved my life, Ethan. I was drowning and you threw me a rope. Ethan thought about that conversation later, after he'd picked up Mia from school and was making dinner while she did homework at the kitchen table. He hadn't thought of it as saving Claire's life. He'd just been trying to do something kind, something brave. But maybe those were the same things sometimes. Daddy, you're smiling at the pasta, Mia observed. That's weird. Ethan laughed.
Just thinking about stuff, Bug. Happy stuff? Yeah, happy stuff. As Claire's pregnancy progressed and the morning sickness eased, they developed new rhythms. Ethan went with her to every appointment, watching the baby grow on ultrasound screens, hearing the heartbeat get stronger. They found out at 20 weeks that it was a girl, and Claire had sobbed in the doctor's office for 10 minutes straight. "Are you okay?" Dr. Martinez had asked with concern. "I'm happy," Claire managed through tears. "Emma was a girl, and now this baby is a girl. It feels like, I don't know, like coming full circle." That night, after Mia was asleep, Ethan sat with Claire on her porch and asked the question that had been bothering him. "Are you sure you're not trying to replace Emma? Because that's not fair to either of you." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I've thought about that constantly. Worried about it. But no, I'm not trying to replace her. Emma was her own person. This baby will be her own person. I'm not trying to recreate what I lost. I'm trying to honor it by not letting grief keep me from loving again." "Okay," Ethan said. "I just needed to hear you say it." "I'm going to name her Hazel," Claire said softly. "If that's okay with you." "It was my grandmother's name. She was the kindest person I ever knew." "Hazel," Ethan repeated, trying it out. "I like it." "Hazel Brooks Holloway," Claire said. "Or Holloway Brooks? We should probably figure out the logistics of that." They decided on Holloway as the legal last name with Brooks as a middle name, a compromise that acknowledged both of them without making assumptions about custody or primary parentage. At 6 months, Claire's pregnancy was becoming obvious, and the neighborhood was starting to notice. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down had congratulated her at the mailbox, assuming there was a partner somewhere. Claire had smiled and thanked her without explaining, and the rumors had started spreading. Who was the father? Was Claire dating someone? Had anyone seen a man coming and going? "We need to tell people something," Claire said to Ethan one Friday night, "before the gossip gets out of control." "What do you want to tell them?" Ethan asked. "The truth, that we're friends who decided to have a child together. It's unconventional, but it's not shameful." So they started telling people. Naomi had already known and been supportive, calling weekly to check on both of them. Tom at Ethan's work had raised his eyebrows but said nothing judgmental, just clapped Ethan on the shoulder and told him he was braver than most men. The neighbors had varying reactions, some curious, some disapproving, some genuinely supportive, but they still hadn't told Mia. At 7 months, Ethan knew they couldn't wait much longer. Mia was asking more pointed questions about why Miss Claire's belly was getting bigger, and Ethan was running out of vague deflections. "We need to tell her," Claire said, echoing his thoughts. "She deserves to know before the baby comes." They planned it carefully. A Saturday afternoon when Ethan didn't have work and they could take as much time as Mia needed to process, Claire came over to Ethan's house, and they sat Mia down in the living room with serious faces that immediately made her nervous. "Am I in trouble?" she asked, her voice small. "No, Bug." "Not at all," Ethan said. "We just need to talk to you about something important." He'd rehearsed this conversation in his head dozens of times, but actually looking at his daughter's worried face made all the prepared words evaporate. "You know how Miss Claire is going to have a baby?" Ethan started. Mia nodded. "She has a baby in her tummy. I asked her about it, and she said yes." "Well, the thing is," Ethan glanced at Claire, who gave him an encouraging nod. "The baby is going to be your sister. Half-sister, technically." Mia's face scrunched up in confusion. "How can Miss Claire's baby be my sister?" "Because I'm the baby's father," Ethan said gently. "Miss Claire and I decided to have a baby together, which means you and the baby will share a dad, me. So you'll be sisters." Mia was quiet for a long moment, processing. "But you're not married to Miss Claire." "No, we're not. We're friends. But sometimes friends can decide to have babies together." "Why?" Mia asked, and there was no accusation in the question, just genuine confusion. Claire spoke for the first time. "Because I really wanted to be a mommy again, and your dad was kind enough to help me. I know this probably seems strange, but I promise nothing about your life is going to change. Your dad loves you just as much as he always has." Will the baby live with us? Mia asked. No, Ethan said. The baby will live with Miss Claire across the street, but you'll be able to visit whenever you want. You'll be a big sister. Mia thought about this. Sophie has a baby brother, and she says he cries all the time and is really annoying. Despite the tension, both Ethan and Claire smiled. Babies do cry a lot, Ethan admitted, but they're also pretty amazing. Will you still have time for me? Mia asked quietly, and Ethan heard the fear underneath the question. He pulled her into his lap immediately. Always, Bug. Always. You are my first priority. You will always be my first priority. Having another baby doesn't change how much I love you or how important you are to me. Promise? Mia's voice was muffled against his chest. I promise. Cross my heart. Mia pulled back and looked at Claire with serious eyes. Are you going to be my other mom? Claire's expression was gentle. I'm going to be your friend, just like I've always been. I'm not trying to replace your mom or be someone I'm not, but I hope we can be close. I hope you'll feel comfortable coming to me if you ever need anything. Okay, Mia said slowly. Then, with the adaptability of children, can I help pick out baby clothes? Sophie got to help with her brother and she says it was fun. Both adults let out breaths they didn't know they'd been holding. Absolutely, Claire said. I would love your help. The conversation wasn't over. Mia asked more questions over the following days and weeks, processing this new reality in bits and pieces. But the initial revelation had gone better than Ethan had dared to hope. At 8 months pregnant, Claire started nesting in earnest. Ethan helped her paint the nursery a soft yellow, assemble furniture, wash tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small. Mia came over sometimes to help, growing more excited about the baby as it became more real to her. What if she doesn't like me? Mia asked one afternoon while folding receiving blankets. She's going to love you, Claire said. You're going to be her big sister. That's a very important job. What do big sisters do? They teach the baby things. They protect them. They show them how to be brave and kind. Claire's voice got soft. I had a big sister once. She was my best friend. Mia absorbed this. Is she still around? No, sweetheart. She died a long time ago. That's sad, Mia said with the straightforward empathy of childhood. I'll be a good big sister to Hazel. I'll teach her everything I know. Watching them together, Ethan felt something settle in his chest. This was going to work. It was messy and unconventional and nothing like the family structure he'd imagined, but it was going to work. At 8.5 months, Claire went into labor on a Wednesday afternoon. She called Ethan at work, her voice tight with pain and excitement. It's happening. Contractions are 5 minutes apart. I'm heading to the hospital. Ethan's heart hammered. I'm on my way. Did you call Naomi? She's picking up Mia from school, said she'll keep her overnight. They'd planned this, Naomi taking Mia so Ethan could be at the hospital with Claire, but the reality of it hit different than the planning. Ethan met Claire at Sacred Heart Medical Center, finding her in a delivery room already in active labor. She was scared and in pain and trying to be brave about it. I can't do this, she gasped between contractions. It's too much. I'm not ready. Yes, you are, Ethan said, taking her hand even though she squeezed it so hard his bones creaked. You're the strongest person I know. You can do this. Labor lasted 12 hours. Ethan stayed the entire time, even when Claire told him he didn't have to, even when the nurses assumed he was the husband and he didn't bother correcting them. He held Claire's hand and brought her ice chips and talked her through contractions and watched this woman he'd come to care about deeply go through something primal and terrifying and beautiful. When Hazel finally arrived at 3:22 in the morning, the sound of her first cry split the room open. She was small and red and screaming, and the nurse placed her on Claire's chest while Claire sobbed with relief and joy and overwhelming emotion. She's here, Claire kept saying. She's really here. Ethan felt tears streaming down his own face, looking at this tiny person who was half him. She had a shock of dark hair and impossibly small fingers that Claire was counting over and over, like she couldn't believe they were real. Do you want to hold her? Claire asked after a few minutes, looking up at Ethan with shining eyes. Ethan had held Mia hundreds of times as a newborn, but this felt different, more fragile somehow.
He took Hazel carefully, supporting her head the way he remembered, and looked down at her scrunched-up face. "Hi, Hazel," he whispered. "I'm Ethan. I'm your dad, I guess. Kind of. It's complicated." Hazel yawned, impossibly tiny, and Ethan felt his heart crack wide open. The next few days were a blur. Claire was exhausted but glowing, learning to breastfeed and change diapers and function on no sleep. Ethan visited every day after work, bringing food and helping with whatever she needed. Naomi brought Mia to the hospital on Friday, and Ethan held his breath as his 6-year-old daughter met her new sister. Mia approached the bassinet cautiously, eyes wide. "She's so little." "She is," Claire said from the hospital bed. "Want to sit in this chair and I'll let you hold her?" They arranged Mia carefully with pillows for support, and Claire placed Hazel in her arms. Mia stared down at the baby with an expression of wonder that made Ethan's eyes burn. "Hi, Hazel," Mia whispered. "I'm your big sister, Mia. I'm going to teach you so many things. I'm going to show you how to swing really high and how to make friendship bracelets and all the best hiding spots in the neighborhood." Watching his daughters together, because they were both his daughters, he realized, even if the relationships were completely different, Ethan understood that he hadn't just helped Claire have a baby. He'd expanded his own capacity for love. He'd shown Mia that family could look 100 different ways and still be real. Claire came home from the hospital on Sunday, and Ethan helped her get settled. The neighbors brought food and gifts, some still clearly confused about the situation, but kind nonetheless. Mrs. Chen from down the street brought a casserole and told Claire she was brave for doing this alone. "I'm not alone," Claire said, smiling at Ethan. "I have more support than I ever expected." Those first weeks were hard. Hazel had colic and cried for hours every evening. Claire was sleep-deprived and emotional, sometimes crying as hard as the baby. Ethan found himself splitting time between his two households, helping Claire with night feedings when it got really bad, then going home to make Mia breakfast and get her ready for school. "You look terrible," Tom said one day at work. "When's the last time you slept?" "I honestly can't remember," Ethan admitted. "You can't run yourself into the ground. You're no good to anybody if you collapse." But Ethan couldn't stop. Claire needed him. Hazel needed him. Mia needed him. He'd signed up for this, had known it would be hard, and he was determined to follow through. It was Naomi who finally intervened, showing up at Ethan's house one Saturday with the firmness that only an older sister could manage. "You need to set boundaries," she said. "I know you want to help Claire, but you have your own child to take care of. You can't be in two places at once." "I'm managing," Ethan protested. "You're drowning. And more importantly, you're teaching Mia that it's okay to burn yourself out for other people. Is that really what you want her to learn?" Naomi was right, and Ethan knew it. He sat down with Claire that evening and had a hard conversation about realistic expectations. "I want to help," he said, "but I can't be here every night. I can't sacrifice my time with Mia or my own health. We need to figure out a sustainable schedule." Claire, to her credit, understood immediately. "I've been leaning on you too much. I'm sorry. I got scared. Scared I couldn't do it alone." "You're not alone," Ethan said, "but I also can't be your co-parent. That's not what we agreed to." They worked out a better system. Ethan would come over twice a week to help with evening routines, giving Claire a break to shower and sleep. The rest of the time, Claire would manage on her own or lean on other support. A postpartum doula she hired, neighbors who offered to help, her parents who came to visit from Ohio and were surprised but supportive. As the months passed and Hazel grew from a colicky newborn into a smiling baby, something shifted. Claire found her footing as a mother. The overwhelming grief that Ethan had worried would consume her didn't materialize. Instead, she threw herself into motherhood with fierce love and dedication. And slowly, organically, their unusual family structure began to work. Mia visited Claire's house regularly, helping with bath time and playing with Hazel. Claire and Ethan maintained their friendship, now deepened by shared parenthood, but still boundaried in important ways. They made decisions about Hazel together, vaccination schedules, childcare options, medical concerns, but Claire was clearly the primary parent. When Hazel was 6 months old, Claire went on a date. A man from her graphic design network had asked her to dinner, and she'd said yes after agonizing over it for a week. "Is that weird?" she'd asked Ethan. You being okay with me dating? Why would it be weird? We're not together, Ethan said, though he felt something complicated twist in his chest. But we have a child together. Which doesn't mean you can't have a life. Go on the date. See what happens. The date went well. Then there was a second date and a third. Claire started seeing someone named Marcus who worked in software development and seemed like a decent guy. Ethan met him once when dropping Mia off, and Marcus had been friendly but clearly uncertain about the unusual situation. So, you and Claire, Marcus had started, are friends? Ethan finished. Co-parents. Nothing romantic. And you're cool with her dating? I want her to be happy, Ethan said honestly, whatever that looks like. But the truth was more complicated. Watching Claire build a life that didn't center around him and their daughters stirred up feelings Ethan hadn't expected. Not jealousy exactly, but something adjacent to it. A strange possessiveness over someone he had no claim to. It was Mia who finally asked the question Ethan had been avoiding. Daddy, do you love Miss Claire? They were making dinner together, Mia carefully measuring pasta while Ethan chopped vegetables. Of course I love her, Ethan said carefully. She's my friend. Not like that, Mia said with 7-year-old exasperation, like boyfriend-girlfriend love. Ethan stopped chopping. What makes you ask that? Because you look at her the way Uncle David looks at Aunt Naomi, and you smile different when she texts you, and you're always finding reasons to go help her even when she doesn't ask. Out of the mouths of babes again. Ethan set down his knife and turned to face his daughter. It's complicated, Bug. Grown-ups always say that when they don't want to explain things, Mia observed. Fair point. Okay, the truth is, I care about Claire a lot. More than just friends, maybe. But we made an agreement when we decided to have Hazel together. We agreed we weren't doing this because we were in love, but because she needed help and I wanted to give it to her. But what if you fell in love anyway? Mia asked. Then I'd have to talk to her about it, Ethan said. But she's dating Marcus now, so it doesn't really matter. Marcus is boring, Mia declared. He doesn't do funny voices when he reads stories like you do. Ethan laughed despite himself. That's not really a fair comparison. But Mia had planted a seed that Ethan couldn't unplant. He started paying attention to his own feelings, examining them with the honesty he'd been avoiding. And he had to admit that somewhere between the first conversation and the ultrasounds and the labor and delivery and the late-night feedings, he'd fallen for Claire Holloway. Not because they'd created a child together, though that was part of it, but because he'd seen her at her most vulnerable and her strongest. Because she made him laugh and challenged him to be braver. Because she loved Mia without trying to replace anyone. Because she'd survived something that would have destroyed most people and chosen to keep living anyway. The realization was terrifying. This wasn't part of the plan. They'd agreed to co-parent, not complicate things with romance. But the heart didn't care about agreements. Ethan spent weeks wrestling with whether to say anything. Part of him thought he should keep it to himself. Claire was happy with Marcus. Why mess that up? But another part remembered what Tom had said about not letting fear make all his decisions. The moment of truth came unexpectedly on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Ethan had brought Mia over to play with Hazel, who was now 10 months old and crawling everywhere. The girls were on the floor building block towers and knocking them down with delighted shrieks, and Ethan and Claire were on the couch drinking coffee. Marcus asked me to move in with him, Claire said quietly. Ethan's chest tightened. That's fast. You've only been dating a few months. I know, but he's great with Hazel. He wants a family, and I'm not getting any younger. Why wait? But Claire didn't sound convinced by her own argument. Do you love him? Ethan asked. Claire was quiet for a long moment. I could. Maybe. I think. She looked at Ethan. Do you think I should say yes? This was it. The moment where Ethan could keep quiet and let Claire build a life with someone else, or he could be honest and risk everything they'd built. No, Ethan said. I don't think you should say yes. Why not? Claire asked, turning to face him fully. Because you deserve someone who makes you completely certain. Someone you don't have to talk yourself into loving. Someone who makes you feel the way... Ethan took a breath, committing.
The way I feel about you. Claire went very still. What? I'm in love with you, Ethan said, the words tumbling out now. I didn't mean to be. It wasn't part of the plan, but somewhere between helping you have a baby and watching you become a mother and seeing you survive grief and choose joy anyway, I fell completely in love with you. Claire's eyes were wide, shocked. Ethan, you don't have to feel the same way, Ethan said quickly. I know this complicates everything. I know we agreed this wasn't about romance.
But I can't watch you settle for someone who's just good enough when I'm sitting right here feeling like I might burst from how much I care about you. You fell in love with me? Claire whispered. I fell in love with you, Ethan confirmed, with your strength and your kindness and the way you keep showing up even when things are hard, with how you love our daughters and how you never gave up even when you had every reason to. I love you, Claire. Claire was crying now, tears streaming silently down her face. I thought it was just me. I thought I was imagining it. Ethan's heart hammered. What? I've been in love with you for months, Claire said, maybe longer, but I thought, we made this agreement. We said we weren't doing this because of romance. And then I got pregnant, and I was so scared of ruining everything by catching feelings, so I tried to push them down. And when Marcus asked me out, I thought maybe I could make myself love someone else instead. Someone simpler, someone who wouldn't complicate things. But, Ethan prompted. But I can't stop comparing him to you, Claire admitted. I can't stop wishing it was you sitting across from me at dinner, you reading Hazel bedtime stories, you holding my hand. I've been trying so hard to make myself want someone else when what I really want is you. They stared at each other while the truth hung between them, electric and terrifying and impossibly right. So what do we do? Ethan asked. I don't know, Claire said. This changes everything. Or it doesn't, Ethan said. Maybe this is what it was always supposed to be. Maybe we were just too scared to see it. Claire laughed wetly. We're so stupid. We spent months negotiating every possible complication except the one where we fall in love with each other. Pretty stupid, Ethan agreed. Then more seriously. But Claire, I need you to be sure. I need you to want this for the right reasons. Not because I'm Hazel's father, or because it's convenient, or because you think you owe me something. I want this because you're the best man I've ever known, Claire said fiercely, because you show up for people you care about, because you made me believe in second chances, because when I picture my future, you're in it, not as my co-parent or my friend, but as my partner. On the floor, Mia looked up from the blocks. Are you guys finally going to be boyfriend and girlfriend? Because this took forever. Both adults burst out laughing, the tension breaking. Yeah, Bug, Ethan said. I think we finally are. Good, Mia said seriously. Now you can get married and Hazel can be my real sister and we can all live in one house and be a normal family. Let's maybe take things one step at a time, Claire said, but she was smiling. They did take things slowly. Claire broke up with Marcus, who was disappointed but not devastated. She and Ethan started dating properly. Actual dates where they held hands and kissed goodnight and didn't talk about pediatrician appointments or sleep schedules. They navigated the weird transition from co-parents to romantic partners, figuring out boundaries and expectations all over again. Mia was thrilled and told everyone at school that her dad and Miss Claire were boyfriend and girlfriend now. The neighbors watched with undisguised curiosity as Ethan started spending more time openly at Claire's house. 6 months later, Ethan proposed. Not with a grand gesture, but with something quiet and private. Just the two of them on Claire's porch after both girls were asleep, the Oregon rain falling soft and steady around them. I know we did everything backwards, Ethan said, holding a simple ring he'd saved for months to buy. We had a baby before we even dated, but I don't want to wait anymore to ask you this. Will you marry me? Claire was crying and laughing. Yes, yes, of course, yes. They got married 6 months after that in a small ceremony in Naomi's backyard. Mia was the flower girl and carried Hazel down the aisle, both girls in matching yellow dresses. Claire wore her grandmother's pearls and held a bouquet of roses and lavender from her garden. Ethan couldn't stop smiling the entire day. During the reception, Claire pulled him aside for a moment of quiet. I need to tell you something, she said. Ethan's heart jumped. What? 5 years ago, I thought my life was over.
I thought I'd never be happy again. I thought the best I could hope for was to survive until it didn't hurt quite so much. Claire's eyes were bright with tears. And then you knocked on my door. You knocked on my door, Ethan corrected gently. Okay, I knocked on your door, Claire laughed. And you could have turned me away. You could have told me I was crazy and shut the door and never spoken to me again. But you didn't.
You said yes to something impossible, and it changed everything.
You changed everything, Ethan said. You made me brave. You showed me that playing it safe isn't the same as living. They merged their households a month after the wedding, selling both houses and buying a bigger one on the other side of Eugene, with enough bedrooms for the girls to have their own spaces. Moving day was chaos, boxes everywhere, furniture that didn't fit, Hazel crying because her routine was disrupted, Mia simultaneously excited and anxious about the change. But that first night in their new house, after everything was mostly unpacked and both girls were finally asleep, Ethan and Claire stood in their new kitchen and looked around at the mess and the promise of it all. We did it, Claire said softly. We actually built a family. We did, Ethan agreed. The weird, backwards, nothing like we planned it kind of family. The best kind, Claire said, and kissed him. Years later, when Hazel was old enough to understand, they told her the full story. How Claire had been so lonely and grief-stricken that she'd knocked on Ethan's door and asked for help. How Ethan had been so scared but said yes anyway. How they'd created her before they even realized they were falling in love. So I'm the reason you got together? Hazel asked, eyes wide. You're one of the reasons, Claire said. You reminded us both that taking risks can lead to beautiful things. Mia, now a teenager, rolled her eyes affectionately. You guys are so cheesy. But she was smiling, and that night Ethan caught her showing Hazel old photos from before the wedding, telling her little sister stories about how their family had been built from impossible choices and unexpected love. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Claire took Ethan back to the spot where she'd first asked for his help. They sat on his old porch, someone else lived there now, and looked across the street at her former house. Do you ever regret it? Claire asked. Any of it? Never, Ethan said without hesitation. You knocked on my door and asked me for a miracle, and somehow we built a whole life together. I knocked on your door and you were brave enough to answer, Claire corrected. That's the miracle. And sitting there in the Oregon twilight, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, Ethan thought about the man he'd been 5 years ago, the one who'd built his world so small and safe that nothing could hurt him, the one who'd been so scared of risk that he'd almost said no to the best thing that ever happened to him. He thought about Claire's question from that first night, whether surviving was enough or if she was allowed to want to really live. And he thought about his own answer to that question, the one he'd discovered by saying yes to something impossible. Surviving had never been enough, not for Claire and not for him, but living, really living, with all its mess and complications and unexpected joy, that was everything. They went home to their daughters, to the life they'd built from grief and hope and one desperate knock on a door. And Ethan knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't change a single impossible thing about it.